Hello everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Damien. My marriage to Cassandra ended when our twin daughters, Natalia and Lily, were still small. They just turned 2, and we'd been married for 4 years. Those 4 years felt longer than they should have, stretched thin by constant arguments, fundamental incompatibilities, and a growing sense that we'd made a mistake we were both too stubborn to admit. The divorce itself was contentious in the beginning. We fought over small things. But when it came to the custody hearing, something unexpected happened. Cassandra simply stopped showing up. She missed the first hearing. Her lawyer made excuses. She missed the second. More excuses. By the third hearing, her lawyer withdrew from the case entirely. Cassandra never contested custody. She never filed paperwork requesting visitation. She just disappeared. I was awarded sole custody by default. No shared arrangement. No alternating weekends. Just me and 2 little girls who kept asking when Mommy was coming back. I told them that Mommy needed to figure some things out, and she wasn't going to be around for a while. They cried, and I held them. The 15 years after that were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. I worked as an operations manager for a manufacturing company in Durham, North Carolina. The job paid decently enough to support us, but it was demanding. Long hours, occasional weekend shifts, constant problem solving. I'd leave work at 5:30, pick up the girls from after-school care, drive home, make dinner, help with homework, give baths, read bedtime stories, and collapse into bed around 11. Then wake up at 6 and do it all over again. I missed work events because they had a school play. I turned down promotions that would have required travel because I couldn't leave the girls with a babysitter for days at a time. I learned to braid hair by watching YouTube videos at midnight after the girls had gone to bed. I taught myself to cook actual meals instead of relying on frozen dinners and takeout. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom rental house in a quiet suburb. The girls shared one room, decorated with posters and stuffed animals and all the things kids accumulate, while I had the other. Money was tight, especially in the early years. I stretched every paycheck, clipped coupons, bought clothes at consignment stores, said no to expensive summer camps, and the latest gadgets their friends had. But we made it work. They had what they needed: food, shelter, school supplies, birthday parties, Christmas presents. Maybe not everything they wanted, but enough. And they thrived. They were both studious, always reading, always asking questions about how things worked. They both made good grades. They were polite, well-adjusted kids, despite having only one parent. I felt a bittersweet pride in what I'd managed to give them. Stability, structure, love, consistency. Everything Cassandra hadn't been able to provide. I never spoke badly about their mother, even though part of me wanted to. When they asked about her, which they did less and less as the years went on, I'd tell them simply that sometimes people aren't ready to be parents, and that wasn't their fault. I didn't want them growing up with resentment or shame. 15 years passed this way. They turned 17, about to graduate from high school, and were discussing several universities to apply to. I was proud of how far we came. Then, one evening in early June, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I'd gotten into the habit of letting unknown numbers go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was somewhat familiar. It was my ex-wife, Cassandra. She said she wanted to reconnect with the girls, that they were still her children, and she was in a better place now. She said she'd gotten remarried, had stability, and was ready to be part of their lives. I sat there on my couch, phone pressed to my ear, not knowing how to respond. My first instinct was to protect them, to tell her no, that she'd lost that right when she walked away 15 years ago, that she didn't get to show up now that the hard part was over, now that they were grown and didn't need round-the-clock care. But I also knew it wasn't entirely my decision to make. They were adults, or nearly adults. They had a right to know their mother if they wanted to. I told Cassandra I'd think about it. I didn't commit to anything. I said I needed to talk to the girls first. She agreed, gave me her number, and we ended the call. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at nothing. That night, I told the girls about the call. They were busy with their devices in the living room. So before I started, I asked them to put theirs away because I needed to talk to them about something important. They looked concerned immediately. I rarely did the serious talk thing unless something was actually serious. I told them their mother had called, that she wanted to meet them. The room went completely silent. Their faces were a combination of shock and confusion. Then the question started. Where had she been? Why now? What did she want? Was she okay? I answered what I could honestly. I didn't know where she'd been or what she'd been doing. I didn't know why now specifically. She wanted to reconnect. Yes, she seemed okay. I told them the decision was theirs. I wouldn't force them either way. But I needed to know how they felt about it. They looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them that only siblings share. Natalia spoke first. She said she was curious, that she'd always wondered about Cassandra, that she wanted to at least meet her once. Lily nodded. She said she felt the same way. There was this quiet longing in her voice, a little girl still hoping to know her mother. My heart ached hearing it, but I understood. I thought to myself, you can't fight the part of your kids that still wants to love the person who left you. So I agreed to arrange a meeting. I called Cassandra back the next day, and we planned something casual. Lunch at a neutral restaurant, public and low pressure. The meeting was set for the following Saturday. When the day came, I drove the girls to the restaurant. My stomach was in knots the entire drive. We arrived a few minutes early. Cassandra was already there, sitting at a table near the window. She looked different from how I remembered. Older, obviously, but also more put together. Cassandra stood as we approached. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked nervous. She hugged both girls. They stood stiffly in her embrace, unsure how to respond. Then we all sat down. The conversation was awkward at first, surface-level questions about school, hobbies, plans for college. Cassandra asked about their lives like someone trying to catch up on a TV show they'd missed several seasons of. The girls were polite but tentative. I stayed mostly quiet, just observing. By the end of lunch, things had relaxed slightly. Cassandra asked if the girls would be willing to meet again. They said yes. We left the restaurant with plans for another meetup the following week. Over the next few weeks, the meetings became more frequent. The girls got invitations to visit their house. They would come back from these visits with stories about the place, the pool, the home theater, the gourmet kitchen. They'd mention things their mother's husband had said, trips he'd taken, people he knew. Then they started coming back with things. New clothes, designer brands I'd never been able to afford, new phones, tablets, expensive sneakers. I didn't say anything at first. I told myself it was just Cassandra trying to make up for lost time, trying to show them she cared. But I started noticing other changes too. They began making comparisons. Small comments that felt like jabs, even if they weren't intended that way. One evening, Lily mentioned that Cassandra's house felt freer. I asked what she meant. She shrugged and said there were just fewer rules there. Natalia made a comment about how nice it was to have a pool to relax by. I reminded her we had a perfectly good public pool 5 minutes away. She rolled her eyes. One evening, I overheard Natalia on the phone with a friend. She was in her room, but her door was slightly open, and voices carried in our small house. She was talking about college applications. She said her mother's husband had offered to help, that he knew people at several universities, that he had connections that could make the process easier. I felt a knot form in my stomach hearing it, but I didn't say anything. The visits to Cassandra's became longer. First, they'd be gone for an afternoon, then a full day, then the weekends. Sometimes they'd stay several days during the week. I found myself eating dinner alone more often than not. The house felt empty. I tried to talk to them about it a few times. They'd say everything was fine, that they were just spending time with their mom, which is what I'd agree to. I couldn't argue with that, so I didn't. But the distance kept growing. Then we had a boundary issue. We'd always had basic rules in the house. Nothing draconian, just normal parent stuff. Curfew on school nights. Check in if plans change. Basic respect and communication. Suddenly, those rules were being questioned. One Friday night, Natalia came home 2 hours past curfew. No call. No text. I was still up when she walked in, casual as could be. I asked where she'd been. She said she was at Mom's and lost track of time. I told her that wasn't acceptable, that she still needed to communicate when she'd be late. She sighed heavily, like I were being unreasonable. Lily, who'd come downstairs when she heard voices, immediately jumped to Natalia's defense. She said I was being controlling and that Natalia was an adult now. I tried to stay calm as I explained that it wasn't about control. It was about basic respect and communication. That we lived together and courtesy mattered. That's when things escalated. Natalia said I was just trying to assert authority because I was threatened by their mother's husband's influence. I told her that was ridiculous, that this had nothing to do with their mother or her husband. Lily got more heated. She said maybe if I weren't so rigid all the time, they wouldn't prefer being at Mom's. I felt my patience wearing thin, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I reminded them that I'd raised them by myself for 15 years, that I'd given up a lot to make sure they were okay, that I deserved basic respect in my own home. That's when Lily said, "You're just jealous because Mom's husband is a better father than you ever were." Before I could even process them, Natalia added her own blow. We already told him yes to adopting us. He actually wants us. There was complete silence. I stood there staring at them both as my expression went blank. I felt something inside me shut down completely. There's a kind of pain that doesn't make you cry. It just empties you. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself or point out the absurdity of what they just said. I just turned and walked to my bedroom. I closed the door quietly behind me and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. 15 years of sacrifice of putting them first is being reduced to nothing in a single sentence. I sat there for a long time, numb. Then something else occurred to me. Something they didn't know about. Years ago, when the girls were still young, I'd set up a trust fund for their future. It wasn't anything extravagant. I couldn't afford to put away massive amounts. But every month, I deposited what I could. Sometimes it was $100. Sometimes it was $50. During lean months, it was $20. But I never missed a month. Over 15 years, it had grown to a substantial amount. Enough to cover in-state tuition, housing, and living expenses for both girls through 4 years of college. It wasn't a fortune, but it was significant. I'd structured the trust carefully with my lawyer. The funds were earmarked specifically for their education and were accessible only while they remained under my legal guardianship. The clause was clear. If custody or guardianship transferred to another party, if they were adopted by someone else, the trust would immediately void. The money would revert to me as the settlor. I'd done this deliberately as a protection mechanism. I'd never told the girls about the trust. I wanted it to be a surprise when they started college, a way to tell them that I'd been planning for their future all along. Now, sitting in my dark bedroom, I realized their comment about adoption had massive legal implications. If their mother's husband actually adopted them, my guardianship would terminate, and the trust fund would automatically be voided. I didn't tell them this. I didn't storm back out there and throw it in their faces. I just sat with the information. The next morning, I called my lawyer. We'd worked together on the original divorce and custody arrangement. He'd helped me set up the trust fund years ago. I explained the situation. He confirmed what I already knew. If they were adopted, the trust would be void. The funds would return to me. The girls would have no claim to it. I asked him to update all the relevant paperwork to reflect this explicitly, just to eliminate any ambiguity. He said he'd take care of it. Over the following days, the atmosphere in the house was unbearable. The girls clearly felt uncomfortable about what they'd said, but pride kept them from apologizing. They avoided me, staying in their rooms or spending even more time at Cassandra's. I continued my normal routine, but I was emotionally detached. I'd already checked out internally. Then, one Sunday afternoon, Cassandra called. She said the girls had decided they wanted to move in with her and her husband permanently, that it would be better for everyone. I didn't argue. I didn't try to convince them to stay. I simply said okay. She seemed surprised by my easy acceptance. She'd probably expected resistance, maybe even a fight. When she didn't get one, she quickly ended the call. That week, the girls packed their belongings. I watched from the doorway as they filled boxes with clothes, books, devices, all the accumulated possessions of their childhoods and teenage years. They emptied their closets, stripped posters off walls, and packed up the stuffed animals they'd kept on shelves even though they were too old for them. They didn't make eye contact with me much during the process. The few times they did, I could see discomfort there, maybe even some uncertainty. But they didn't stop packing. When they finished, Cassandra came to pick them up with her husband's large SUV. They stood awkwardly in the entryway. Natalia opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it again. Lily looked at the floor. I spoke first, keeping my voice calm and even. I told them I loved them, that I always would, no matter what. I hoped they'd be happy. Natalia mumbled something that might have been thanks or bye. Lily just nodded, her eyes suddenly wet. Then they left. I stood in the doorway, watching Cassandra's car pull away until it disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the door, walked back into the now empty house, and sat on the couch in complete silence. The house felt enormous without them. Their absence was palpable in every room, the empty bedrooms, the quiet hallways, the kitchen that didn't need to accommodate multiple schedules anymore. Over the next week, I made decisions. There was no point keeping a 3-bedroom house I didn't need. The rent was manageable but unnecessary for one person. I gave my landlord notice that I'd be moving out at the end of the lease, which was conveniently up for renewal in a few weeks. I started apartment hunting and found a small 1-bedroom place much closer to my work. It was less than half the size of the house. It was functional, affordable, more than adequate for my needs. I spent weekends sorting through belongings, deciding what to keep and what to get rid of. I donated furniture I wouldn't need, the girls' bedroom sets, the extra chairs, and kitchen items for a larger household. I kept only what was essential. When moving day came, it took just one trip with a small truck rental. The new apartment was sparse. A bed, a couch, a small dining table with 2 chairs, basic kitchen equipment, my clothes, and some books. That was it. I didn't hang pictures on the walls. Didn't buy decorative items. It wasn't meant to be homey or welcoming. It was just a place to sleep and eat. My routine got simplified. I woke up, went to work, came home, made simple meals for one, read or watched TV, and went to bed. Weekends were quiet, errands, gym. I didn't contact the girls. I didn't call or text to check in. I didn't ask Cassandra how they were doing. I simply existed in this new, smaller life I'd created. I didn't speak badly about them to anyone. The few coworkers who knew I had daughters and asked about them got simple answers. They were living with their mother now, doing well as far as I knew. I didn't elaborate, didn't explain the circumstances or express any bitterness. I just disappeared from their daily lives the way Cassandra had disappeared from theirs 15 years earlier. 3 months passed this way. My life had achieved a kind of equilibrium. Work was fine. My expenses dropped dramatically without 2 additional people to support. I was neither happy nor unhappy. Then, one Tuesday afternoon while I was at work, my phone rang. Cassandra's name lit up the screen. I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped outside into the parking lot and answered. There were no pleasantries or small talk. She demanded to know when I was paying the girls' college fees. She said Natalia and Lily had both been admitted weeks ago and needed some fees paid immediately or they'd lose their spots. I stood there in the parking lot, genuinely confused. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. No one had informed me about any college admissions. She said, of course, they'd been admitted. The acceptance letters had come over the summer. I asked why no one had told me about this. She said they shouldn't have to tell me, that I should have been staying informed about my daughters' lives. I felt a flash of anger, but kept my voice level. I pointed out that they'd moved out, chosen to live with her and her husband, and cut off communication with me. I respected their choice by not inserting myself where I wasn't wanted. She ignored this completely and continued about the needed payments. The amounts weren't exactly substantial. I interrupted her. I said simply, since the girls chose to live with you and your husband, and since Natalia mentioned that your husband was going to handle their college applications and had connections, I assumed he'd be handling the financial side as well. There was a pause on the other end. Then Cassandra's voice got more aggressive. She said I was being petty and vindictive, that I was punishing the girls for wanting a relationship with their mother, that I was a sorry excuse for a father if I'd abandoned them financially out of spite. I stayed calm. I told her I wasn't abandoning anyone. They'd made their choice about where they wanted to live and who they wanted as a parental figure. Natural consequences followed those choices. As she got insulting with her tone escalating, becoming more hostile, I ended the call mid-sentence. I stood for a moment, then went back inside to finish my work for the day. That evening at home, I thought about the call. Part of me felt vindicated. They'd chosen their mother's husband because of his wealth and connections, dismissed me as inadequate, and now they were discovering that money and promises weren't the same thing as actual commitment. But another part of me just felt sad. They were losing opportunities. College acceptances don't wait, because they'd misjudged the situation. Still, I didn't reach out. They'd made their decision. This was the consequence. After that call, there was complete radio silence. No texts from the girls. No calls. Nothing. 5 months passed this way. I settled further into my quiet life. I took up reading more seriously, working through books I'd always meant to read but never had time for. I found a strange peace in the simplicity. No feeling like I was constantly failing to meet someone's expectations. Some nights I'd think about Natalia and Lily, wonder how they were doing, whether they were happy at Cassandra's, whether they ever thought about me. But I didn't act on those thoughts. Didn't pick up the phone. Didn't drive by Cassandra's house. I just let the distance remain. Then, one evening months after Cassandra's call, I was home after work, making dinner, when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lily's number. The message was long, several paragraphs. I sat down on my couch to read it properly. It started with apologies. They were sorry for being short-sighted. Sorry for the things they'd said. Sorry for how they'd treated me. Then it explained what had happened after they moved in with their mother and her husband. The first few weeks had been wonderful, according to the message. They'd enjoyed the novelty of a luxury, the pool, the nice rooms, expensive meals, and the freedom from rules. But things changed once college acceptance letters arrived. Their mother's husband had made big promises about handling everything and his willingness to invest in their futures. But when actual payment time came, his attitude completely shifted. He started making comments about how expensive college was, about how he already supported Cassandra and her lifestyle, about how he hadn't signed up to pay for another man's children. The comments got more frequent and more pointed. He'd make remarks about freeloaders, about people expecting handouts, about knowing their place. He never said these things directly to Natalia and Lily, but he said them loudly enough that they clearly heard and understood who he meant. The college payment deadlines came and went, but he never paid. Their spots went to someone else on the wait list. Both girls had lost their college placements entirely. The message continued, explaining that they'd tried talking to Cassandra privately about her husband's behavior. She'd make weak defenses. She'd say her husband was under a lot of stress with work, that he meant well but was just overwhelmed. Over time, they realized Cassandra had no real power in her relationship with her husband. She was financially dependent on him. The house was his. The cars were his. Her lifestyle existed entirely at his discretion. She couldn't or wouldn't stand up to him on their behalf. The message described how they'd started feeling increasingly unwelcome in the house. The atmosphere became hostile. They felt like intruders rather than family members. The message ended with a direct request. Could they come back home? They understood that I was angry with them. They knew they'd hurt me and made terrible choices. But they wanted to come back if I'd allow it. They promised they'd learned their lesson. That they understood now what they'd had and taken for granted. That they'd do better. I read the message twice, then set my phone down. I felt a complicated tangle of emotions. Part vindication. I'd been right about the hollowness behind the flashy exterior of their mother's life. Part sadness. They'd lost real opportunities because of this. Part uncertainty. Should I let them back after what they'd said? Would they really be different? Or would they just need me until the next better option came along? I didn't respond that night. Or the next day. Or the day after that. 4 days passed before I finally called Lily's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice breathless and hopeful. I kept my voice steady, but emotionally distant. I told her I'd gotten the message and had been thinking about it. Then I said, I don't have space for you girls anymore. Things have changed here. There was silence on the other end. Then I heard soft crying. I continued, explaining that I'd downsized after they left. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment now. It was set up for 1 person, not 3. The crying got louder. I could hear Natalia in the background, too, both of them clearly upset. They asked if they could at least visit. Please. They just wanted to see me, to talk in person. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to maintain the distance. But another part, the part that had raised them, that had loved them through everything, couldn't quite refuse. I told them they could come by that weekend. Saturday afternoon. They thanked me profusely through tears, and we ended the call. Saturday came. At 2 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Natalia and Lily standing there. They looked humbled. I stepped aside and let them in. They walked into the small apartment, and I watched their faces as they took it in. They sat together on the couch. I sat in one of the dining chairs, facing them. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Natalia started talking. She apologized again, more genuinely than in the text message. I could see genuine remorse and humiliation in their faces. They explained that they'd realized, far too late, what they'd given up. That they'd been seduced by luxury and the idea of an easier life, without appreciating the sacrifices I had been making. When they finished talking, I sat quietly for a moment before responding. I acknowledged their apology, told them I appreciated them being honest about what happened. But I also told them that trust, once broken the way they'd broken it, doesn't automatically restore itself just because someone apologizes. They'd hurt me deeply with the specific words they'd used. By reducing 15 years of sacrifice to jealousy. By saying someone who'd known them for months was a better father than the person who'd raised them alone since they were toddlers. Those words had cut deeper than they probably realized. And recovering from that kind of wound takes time. They both nodded, accepting this. Natalia said they understood they'd damaged the relationship severely. That they didn't expect instant forgiveness. Lily promised they'd earn back my trust, however long it took. That they'd accept any rules or expectations I set. That they'd work to help support themselves rather than expecting me to carry everything. They meant it. I could see that they meant it this time. But I'd also changed. I wasn't the same person who'd accommodated their every need and accepted being taken for granted. I told them I'd need time to think about everything. That this wasn't a decision I'd make in one afternoon. They asked if they could at least stay in contact while I thought about it. If we could talk on the phone sometimes. I agreed to that much. They left about an hour later. Both hugged me before they went. I hugged them back, but didn't hold on too long. After they left, I sat in my apartment for a long time thinking. Over the next week, I had several phone conversations with them. They called every other day or so, never pushy, just wanting to talk. They told me about their current situation. Their mother's husband barely spoke to them. Their mother, Cassandra, was caught in the middle and ineffective. Since the adoption had never actually happened, legally, they were still my dependents. The trust was still valid. 2 weeks after their visit to my apartment, I called Natalia and told her I'd made a decision. I said they could come back, but things would be different this time. I'd start looking for a 2-bedroom apartment, something that could accommodate 3 people. They'd need to contribute financially through their part-time jobs, not major amounts, but enough to teach them about shared responsibility. College plans would need to be completely reassessed. Rules would be stricter than before and non-negotiable. Communication, respect, and contribution to household tasks. They'd follow them without complaint, or they'd need to find somewhere else to live. Natalia agreed immediately to everything. She put me on speaker so Lily could hear too. And Lily also agreed enthusiastically. I told them I'd start apartment hunting that weekend and would let them know when I found something. Over the next 3 weeks, I looked at places. Found a decent 2-bedroom apartment in a complex between my old house and my current small apartment. About the size of our old house, but newer and better maintained. The girls helped me move in when the lease was ready. We settled into the new place gradually. They kept their promises about the part-time jobs and contributed to groceries and utilities each month. They followed the house rules without complaint, came home on time, communicated their plans, and did their share of chores. Family dinners became a regular thing again. We'd cook together and eat at the small dining table, talking about our days. The conversations were cautious at first, everyone careful not to say the wrong thing. But gradually, they became more natural. I started researching college options with them, looked into scholarship opportunities, financial aid, transfer pathways to 4-year schools. I still didn't tell them about the trust fund. I wanted to see sustained change first. Wanted to know this wasn't just temporary behavior until they got what they needed. Months passed. The changes held. There were good moments. There were also hard moments. But we worked through them. They thanked me for giving them another chance, for not walking away completely when we would have deserved it, for still being there. Then I told them something I'd been waiting to tell them. I said that years ago, when they were little, I'd started saving money specifically for their college education, that I'd put away what I could every single month for 15 years, that it had grown into a substantial trust fund, enough to cover tuition, housing, and expenses for both of them through 4-year degrees. They stared at me, not understanding at first. I explained that the trust had been structured to remain valid only while they were under my legal guardianship, that if they'd actually been adopted like they'd mentioned, the trust would have been voided. Recognition slowly dawned on their faces. Natalia asked if the trust was still valid, if it still existed. I said yes, because the adoption never actually happened, because legally they'd never stopped being my daughters. They both were shocked, understanding how close they'd come to losing something they didn't even know existed. I told them the money was theirs for college, but there would be conditions. They'd need to maintain good grades. They'd need to continue working part-time to understand the value of money. They'd need to make smart decisions about schools and majors and their futures. They promised they would. I reflected often during this time on what I'd learned from all of it. I learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people face the natural consequences of their choices. That protecting people from those consequences doesn't help them grow. It just delays the lesson. I learned that you can't make someone appreciate what they have by telling them to appreciate it. They have to lose it first and feel that absence. Only then do they understand value. I learned that forgiveness is complicated. It's not about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about deciding not to let that pain define who you become next. It's about choosing to keep your heart open even when it's been broken. My daughters had to leave to understand what they had. They had to chase something that looked better to realize it was empty. They had to lose me to understand what I'd been to them all along. Thank you for watching.